games are much broader and more nuanced than most people give them credit for. And if you can think of an idea, there's probably a game out there that already exists that embodies that idea in some way. Had I the means, I would immediately start a R&D lab with the express and explicit focus of not just like building a game, trying to understand how we can apply games as tools for making society better, because that work does exist. Groups like that do currently exist, but they are almost always exclusively in the academic realm. And as a result, the things they come up with are seen as purely theoretical as a result.
Hello and welcome to Imagining 2040 Pathways to Flourishing Futures. I'm your host, Andrew Nicholson, and today we're stepping into a world that is far more expansive, creative and socially significant than many people realise. That is the world of video gaming. In 2026, estimates of the total number of video game players globally put the figure at around 3.6 billion. That is about 42% of the total world population, or 61% of the global online population. And those players are spending up to 10 to 12 hours per week on their game activities. For decades, video gaming was often dismissed as escapist fun, a recreational distraction, or a niche hobby. But given the evolution of the video games industry and the massive public engagement phenomenon it has become, those old stereotypes simply don't hold anymore. For instance, certain types of video game available today reflect some of the most diverse and artistically ambitious mediums on the planet. A space where storytelling, design, psychology, ethics, and game community engagement all intersect for a large player audience. In this episode, we're going to explore how creative video game synergies could further evolve over the next 15 years or so. Looking ahead, what contribution could the video games industry make to some of the pressing social, environmental and economic challenges of our time? And what if we more fully embraced and applied the progressive imagination and community engagement potential of the video games industry to some of our major development problems in coming years? Could the industry help us progress toward achieving the sorts of preferred 2040 futures we visualize throughout this series? To help us explore some aspects of these questions and the exciting future potential of the video games industry, I'm joined by James Nicholson, a games and media researcher, industry consultant, musician, cultural creative and entrepreneur, who I'm proud to say also happens to be my son. James specialises in thinking about software systems that provide entertainment to their users, as well as the sociological impact of the art that is contained in that software. He has spent years thinking about how games shape us and how they might now help shape a better world. So a warm welcome to you, James. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, as am I. Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's fantastic. Well, let's kick off by asking you to build a bit on that very short bio I gave you. Can you give us a bit more on your background, especially as it has shaped your work over the last few years?
Sure, yeah. So I started life in the world of cinema originally. And when I got into games, I was struck by the sort of similarities in how games are made in comparison to how films are made, specifically within the domain of, the audience's reaction to the art being created. And so that interest has sort of shaped a lot of the work that I undertook when I was over in Canada working in the games industry. And it also has sort of pushed me in this direction of being more interested in the social implications of games and the ability of games to act as a sort of filter/mirror for human behavior. I mean, this property of games has always been known about, but it became particularly obvious to me that they had this sort of power and capability after spending so much time just sort of talking to members of the general public about games. So I am interested in the study of games, but I'm more interested in them as examples of art. And I'm, again, more interested in how other human beings sort of respond to that art, more so than I am, trying to understand their habits of play. And so I'm a little bit more interested in what play actually means. And that interest has shaped my work.
Thanks for that, James, and that lovely overview of where you've come from, some early influences. And thanks once again for the opportunity to interview you for Imagining 2040. And let's just continue the thread now by looking ahead, starting to look ahead. Can you give our audience, you've already started to point to this, but can you give our audience some early thoughts and vision on how the video games industry could contribute to getting us onto more flourishing future development pathways? Look, I'm someone who has never been a video game player, I'll admit that, but I have read that certain video games in the future could possibly give more people, more players, a taste of what, for instance, citizen-led community planning and decision-making could feel like. Now, have I got that right, or am I just dreaming?
You're not dreaming. But I would be lying if I said it was a prominent aspect of the industry at the moment. And that's, I think, at the core of where I believe the game industry should ultimately go. At the moment, it is a purely entertainment, it's not purely entertainment based, but entertainment is a large portion of, I guess, the impetus for why games get made at the moment. And, we know they have these very interesting properties as sort of devices by which to observe and interpret human behavior. So there's a without wanting to be too much of an economist here, there is a gap in the market for games that have more complex output when we think about their sort of contribution to society than purely entertainment.
Thank you so much, past, present, and starting to look into the future. Thanks for that overview, giving us a sense of where you've come from and some of your early thoughts about where the games industry might go in the future. And that's where we're going to extend the conversation now, even further into one of those possible futures in our first imaginative exercise, Time Travel to 2040. Now, this discussion segment is the imaginative heart of each episode in the series, where we step beyond the failing business as usual present world of can't do, roadblocks and pushback. You can't do that. Well, you couldn't do that because, or that wouldn't work because, that sort of thing, to visualize credible pathways that could take us toward plausible, flourishing futures. And for the listeners out there, if you haven't yet listened to the Imagining 2040 series introduction episode, it might be worth checking that out to get a better overview, understanding of these two contrasting possible futures that we describe throughout the series, open to us in the years ahead. That is the flourishing and failing future scenarios. And we're very much focused on the flourishing future scenarios in this series. So James, and of course all of the listeners out there, imagine you have a device that can take you forward into the longer term future to the year 2040, just under 15 years from now. It might land you in one spot or it might hover you over the future landscape, but either way, upon arrival in that better, credible 2040, you sense immediately that this is not a business as usual future, it's a flourishing one. And you know that because you can sense, see, hear, and even taste that it is a climate safer future world. It has thriving green bioregions full of nature and wildlife, and they're existing alongside prosperous, safe, and supportive human communities which prioritize the well-being of their citizens. And strictly for your interest, you're fascinated to learn of the contributions that the video games industry has made to bringing about these flourishing future achievements, perhaps, just perhaps, via the informal education in citizen participatory decision-making skills it has enabled, perhaps via the simple encouragement it has given to many more people to think more imaginatively and confidently about the better futures they want to achieve for the generations to follow. But whatever you learned about the influence of video games in 2040, James, now imagine you've returned to 2026, ready to share a visionary time travel report with us. So, James, can you give us a summary now from your time travel report? What did you see, hear, and feel in that flourishing 2040 future?
One of the things that struck me as I moved throughout this society that reminded me of the one we currently have in a lot of ways was a lot of people that I interacted with mentioned that they had participated in the construction of games, but in ways that you might not expect. For example, lots of people that I spoke to mentioned that they had sort of, at one time in their life or another, they had taken part in this sort of simulation, a social simulation of governance, whereby several members of society are sort of selected to come and participate in this. It's essentially like jury duty, but it's not exactly, you're not deciding whether someone is guilty or not. You're basically put in a room with a bunch of other people that are from all walks of life and demographics and sort of social backgrounds. And you're given a task to do, and that task might be something like, you have to pass a new law that changes how the distribution of food works in this society, or you now need to come up with new policies that might positively affect education in your region and things like that. And these people are not really doing this so that those laws exactly will be passed. What they're actually doing is they're participating in a simulation so that the actual government of the time can observe how the average person is thinking about these decisions and some of the psychology implications of that decision-making process. And all of that is being done to collect data on both how people in this society actually think about these problems, and also what the government can learn from its people about them and what aspects of those issues are important. So it's sort of like a citizen jury, but it's more like a simulation of politics, so that the actual politics of the time can learn from that and thereby do a better job governing the society. I also I saw a lot of application of games in education systems as well. And as kids got a bit older, so as they approached about sort of 14 to 15, they were given, particularly in sociological studies and in high school and early university, they were given scenarios much like the one I described earlier. And they were asked to sort of role play in situations that have sociological implications for the society. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next section, but if you imagine, let's imagine that you have to be a bureaucrat at a border and sort of stamp people's documents as they come in. Or, let's say you're a microbiologist and you're looking at some data that you've been given on whether a particular type of bacteria is present in food shipments that have come into the country, and you need to sort of make an educated guess based on that data of whether this thing is dangerous and whether you should do something about it. And all of these sort of situations are used in education to build a deeper understanding of sort of information theory and its implications for politics and policy building, but taught to students at a reasonably young age. Certainly at a reasonably early time in their adulthood. because that's what games are really useful for. They're really useful for helping someone develop a deeper understanding of, a particular role in society or how something actually feels to do. And there's many examples of games that exist today that do that very effectively. And I think those are some of the better games out there.
So, James, thanks for that. A really intriguing vision for a possible 2040 where the well-being of citizens of various ages has been actually improved and enhanced through the use of video games. And just to say, in this interview, as with others in the series, we're always showcasing a simple future vision imagination exercise here, not for entertainment, nothing wrong with that, but neither to create a utopia or a dystopian fantasy, but rather to demonstrate how straightforward it can be to start to think about plausible, flourishing futures. The future visions of our various guests are imaginary, but they can also be thought of as memories of the future because they're drawing on the past and present moment to help visualize better futures. They're drawing on the solid professional expertise, lived experience, as well as the understandable human desire to achieve development pathways which can safeguard the well-being of the generations to follow. Each of our guests has that sort of momentum behind them. But anybody listening out there can try this imaginative thought experiment and the others to follow for themselves, and we hope that you do try that. Because we want to share such imaginative activities through the podcast series to help explore an intriguing question and others. What if many more people could imagine and visualize their own better community-level flourishing futures? Okay, now for the traditional quick debrief, because time travel can be quite disorienting, or so I've been told. So let's quickly confirm we're all safely back in 2026. So James and the listeners out there, what month and year is this?
It is July, and the year is 2026.
Wow, fantastic. So we got back and that was okay.
Hooray.
Yeah. Okay, great. We're back in 2026, all safely back, and let's stay grounded in the present in this year as we explore another way to imagine flourishing futures by noticing what's already here and emerging in the present moment. That is, noticing existing activities, events, ideas, or initiatives which we can think of as pointers toward or signals of better ways of doing development, which, if they were improved, refined, multiplied, or extended, could increase our chances to achieve genuinely flourishing futures. Such promising future signal opportunities can be found in innovative startups and new business models, reports of cutting-edge new technologies, progressive policy proposals, promising trends in well-being, economy adoption, and any genuinely fresh, genuinely bold ideas or insights on how to do future development which could actually benefit the overall public good. Such signals of the future can give us a glimpse of the kind of better world many of us would like to see in 10, 15 or 20 years and beyond. And these aren't fantasies from utopia. They're real initiatives happening right now, and they're pointing us toward the possibilities for better times ahead. So, James, and all of you out there, here's the second imaginative question and exercise of the interview on signals of the future in 2026. Within your own area of research and interest, James, around perhaps software systems for entertainment and the social impacts of art, or perhaps in your everyday life, what do you see as some of the most promising examples or signals of the future in the way I have described them?
There are games at the moment that help you sort of simulate what it's like to be in charge of a group of people and have sort of a duty of care to make sure their society functions well and they are happy within them. One of my favorite examples of this is a game called Frostpunk. Frostpunk is a game where you're in a future where the climate's sort of gone a bit belly up, right? And the world's frozen over, and everyone is trying to make it to the North Pole because that's where they think the rest of the humans will go. but they're not actually that certain of that. And there's a theme of existential dread that hangs over the whole experience as a result. But you basically have to manage this colony of people that all are sort of living around this steam powered heater in the middle of the ice. And, you have to sort of put them to work to gather resources to keep the fire burning. But, then some of them get injured and you have to like set up hospitals, and then you eventually gain the ability to pass laws and sort of introduce things like religion or authoritarianism into the society. And all of these very interesting things have consequences for how that society functions. And it's a really good game, and it teaches you a lot about how you sort of perceive suffering and how you are what your sort of ethical profile is. And it's not a totally it's not a totally clean analog for that sort of thing, because you are ultimately doing it in a virtual space. But the simulation of the thought process, I think, has very important applications to things like politics and our sort of socioeconomic understanding of our society and how we could potentially improve it. So imagine if you took games like that and made them to spec for both, government simulations or education or some other aspect of society that needs not to be gamified, because I don't really like that word, but using games as a tool to sort of elicit the responses of the human being that we're interested in observing, that sort of thing. There's also there's a group that I'd like to make mention of in Melbourne, actually, because they're doing very important work, and I think they're an example of what they're a good example of some of the more nuanced aspects and applications of games that we don't typically think about. They're called Next Level Collaboration, and quite simply, they work with neurodivergent children, and they do so such that those children might sort of learn social skills and be able to engage in the sort of practice of social engagement, because that's one of the things that neurodivergent people are most affected by. And they do all of this not quite with a totally, they don't totally gamify this process, and I'm glad, because that's not really how you do that, but they use games as a method by which to sort of help neurodivergent kids figure out how social interaction really works in the world. And it's just a very nice, very heartwarming application of play. And it's great because play is a very sort of multimodal mental experience. And if you harness it well, you can actually do a lot of good with play. And I think that group down in Melbourne deserves mention because of what they're doing.
Some fantastic examples there of 2026 signals of the future. And just to make this point again, in terms of this part of the discussion of the interview, this thought experiment has demonstrated how identifying signals of the future could be used to help accelerate progress toward flourishing, more citizen inclusive and genuinely democratic development pathways. So another what if question: what if our listeners out there and other people started to actively spot their own progressive signals of the future, those pointers to better ways of doing future development? And what if those same citizens in growing numbers and alliances worked together to draw attention to and support those signals and demand stronger political action to help extend and multiply them? Now, as we near the end of today's great conversation, James, let's return to your inspiring vision of a much improved, progressive, video games influenced culture and global society by 2040 and beyond. Because sadly, here in 2026, many visionary and progressive ideas are far too often dismissed as either too idealistic, too unrealistic, unaffordable, or even possibly un-Australian, although I'm not sure how that would apply to video games specifically. But the almost inevitable pushback and resistance to progressive visionary ideas on how we could achieve better futures is a serious problem. Manufactured stories, disinformation and propaganda put out by vested interests, keen to maintain business as usual, distort and even hijack the opportunity for calm, balanced, progressive future foresight discussion on the sorts of better futures a majority of us want and need. So surely we need to counter that power of self-serving, can't-do, business-as-usual mindsets. And one way to do that is to grow citizen communities of interest who use their imaginations to help them co-create inclusive, community-planned future development roadmaps, which are then used as the basis for political and policy decision-making by elected representatives. I mean, you've just hinted at that in a previous section. So in light of helping counter vested interest spoiling tactics, let's come to our last related imaginative question and exercise of the interview to start to round off this excellent discussion. This exercise demonstrates the imaginative idea of taking unlimited assertive actions to achieve flourishing futures, actions which cannot be resisted by vested interest pushback. Just imagine that. So James and the audience out there, imagine you wake up tomorrow and discover you have gained the wonderful power shared with many other imaginative allies to enact bold, well-considered collaborative reforms within the video games industry or elsewhere if that is important to you. To be clear, for the purposes of the exercise, such reforms would greatly benefit our human and more than human communities, that is, the natural world and other species. So in that scenario, what are up to 3 actions you take immediately to help steer the video games industry toward better opportunities to achieve that sort of flourishing future scenario that we outline in the series?
Had I the means, I would immediately start a R&D lab with the express and explicit focus of not just like building a game, trying to understand how we can apply games as tools for making society better, because that work does exist. Groups like that do currently exist, but they are almost always exclusively in the academic realm. And as a result, the things they come up with are seen as purely theoretical as a result. I would start a lab that has the goal, the specific goal of developing actionable applications for games, and also sort of, bolstering our understanding of games as social tools in general. Either within that lab or within that venture, I would commission a team to produce the citizen jury-like experience that I mentioned in the previous section. And I would sort of try and package that up as a prototype to then, take elsewhere to other parts of the business world or the world of governance, and try and get that into the those systems and demonstrate value with that. I suppose I would I would try and explore new applications for haptic and motion-based control systems. So I've had this idea of developing a set of devices that you wear on your fingers that allow you to play any instrument. Because if you simulate the action of moving your fingers in the right way, you're sort of playing a virtual instrument. So it could be like a cello or like a guitar or something. And the application of motion capture technology and haptics, which is what we call them in the industry, like things that sort of provide a sensory response back to you. The application of that as a means by which to teach someone things like music and painting without them actually having to have a canvas or a real instrument. And so I would kick off sort of research and development into that technology as well. So I guess in summary, R&D lab to look into games as societal tools in general, with no sort of, not quite a blank check, but just no real sort of specific goal other than find applications of games that make society better. I would prototype the policy simulation experience that I described earlier and make it real. And then I would also look into the application of haptic and motion sensor technology for music and art educational purposes.
Wow, James, some wonderful, inspiring and genuinely bold ideas there. Almost, inclines me to think, if I'm still around come 2040, I need to be playing some haptic connected games myself. I mean, it's inspiring me to get involved. But seriously, once again, it's so energizing and uplifting to hear future vision imagination pointing us toward possible actions to achieve better could do and can do futures, as opposed to hearing the often nauseating long list of self-serving PR and business as usual nonsense on why we can't do future development in genuinely progressive ways. So let's just move on now to the end of this wonderful conversation, James. One last question for you in this uplifting interview. Do you have any parting words for our audience? You've already given us a lot of nuggets of wisdom and great ideas to go away with, but any pithy comments or quick quotes which summarize your core message, or perhaps a suggestion for how listeners could get more deeply involved with any of the ideas and initiatives you've outlined today? I mean, we will cover some of these ideas, reference them in our show notes, of course, but whatever you want to say in closing, James.
All I'd say is that games are much broader and more nuanced than most people give them credit for. And if you can think of an idea, there's probably a game out there that already exists that embodies that idea in some way. I'd encourage people to go and look at a particular game creator that I really love. His name is Lucas Pope, and he makes lots of very interesting games about what it's like to do jobs in society. And I'll, Papers, Please would be a recommendation. If you want to be surprised about what a game can be, go and look at Papers, Please. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And while you're there, also check out Disco Elysium, because that is one of the best games I think ever made, ever. So, yeah, very interesting experiences.
What an inspiring way to round off today's conversation, James. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, you've shared such brilliant ideas about innovative development opportunities and possibilities in the video games industry going forward, which could possibly contribute toward helping lead us into futures which are more citizen-led, involving community planning, better nature protection and stewardship by 2040 and beyond, to name but a couple of possible beneficial outcomes. We're always talking here of flourishing, not failing futures. Flourishing futures in which the deeply interconnected health and well-being of all of our communities, human and more than human, here in Australia and internationally, is mutually reinforcing and exists in far better balance than it does today. And we all have a contribution to make. Whatever sector of society we're in, whatever community we live in, we can all make a contribution, an enhanced contribution to that surely fantastically uplifting and inspiring goal. So, James, on behalf of the Imagining 2040 podcast series auspice organisation, that is Householders' Options to Protect the Environment, Hope Incorporated Australia, it just remains for me to say a big thank you for your thought-provoking comments today. You've certainly given me, and I'm sure many other listeners, plenty to reflect on. And as I implied before, I might even get onto playing some of the visionary video games you've mentioned during our interview. So, you've converted an old-timer. Thanks again, James, old son.
Well, thank you very much, Dad. It's been a pleasure.
That was a genuinely intriguing conversation with James Nicholson, exploring how the video games industry might help further engage and encourage the public to imagine and pursue more flourishing futures. Whether through the informal learning many games already offer across environmental, social, economic, and political themes, through the empathy-building experiences some titles create by placing players in the shoes of others, or simply through fostering more hopeful, proactive ways of thinking about preferred futures. The potential is remarkable. And coming at this from my traditional non-video game playing perspective, I've been genuinely amazed by the depth and breadth of existing games designed to educate, inspire, and connect audiences with real-world challenges. Alongside James's suggestions, I've added a few more examples in the show notes of such games. They are the further signals of the future already emerging within the sector. It's also been striking for me to understand that while entertainment-focused games still dominate in 2026, even mainstream titles now include activations that introduce millions of players to real-world concerns around social justice needs or environmental disruption solutions. And given the industry's extraordinary reach, almost half the world's population, imagine the impact if even a few additional percentage points of new indie or purpose-built games focused on topics such as dealing with climate disruption, building greater citizen democracy, or developing empathy-rich learning. The potential influence in support of achieving progressive change for better futures could become truly immense. I was particularly taken by James's idea of establishing dedicated R&D labs for the video games industry. It's clear that we do need much more robust research into how games can reach and motivate many more millions of future players for the greater public good, encouraging them to become advocates and agents of change in support of flourishing futures. Further harnessing the massive public engagement leverage of this global industry, it feels both plausible and possible that we could achieve levels of public outreach and influence beyond the dreams of more traditional advocacy movements. What an uplifting, future-facing idea to close this reflection. So that's what I'm taking away from today's episode. But what about you, our audience, our growing community of visionary thinkers out there? What will you take from today's imaginative conversation? Each of our episodes invites you to join this experiment in future vision imagination to help us try to answer imaginative questions like, what if a podcast like this could help spark the shift we need toward more climate-safe, socially supportive and economically fairer development pathways? Or what if more citizens harnessed their imaginations to map out preferable, credible futures and advocated politically to make them real? Only time will tell if we can answer such questions. Meanwhile, we hope this episode inspires your own imaginative conversations in homes, workplaces, communities, and beyond. Perhaps you could ask yourself, how might our imaginative podcast exercises, time travel, signals of the future, and taking bold actions help me reflect and communicate my hopes for better futures? And what could a flourishing 2040 look like for me and those around me? And if you're enjoying the series, please share it, leave a review or tell others about it. We want to help build a growing, visionary community committed to achieving flourishing futures. We'd also love feedback from you. What in the series resonates with you or challenges you? Leave comments on the podcast platforms or send your thoughts via email, social media or voice message. Details in the show notes and on the Householders Options to Protect the Environment website. Suggestions for future guests, topics or show format improvements are also always welcome. We want this podcast to be a collaborative journey, and your input could help shape what comes next. So, until next time, keep your future vision imaginations alive, keep wearing your flourishing futures hats, and keep sharing ideas about how, together, we can reimagine better development pathways toward flourishing 2040s and beyond. My name is Andrew Nicholson, host of Imagining 2040, and thanks so much for listening. Householders' Options to Protect the Environment, Hope Incorporated Australia, providing podcasts, research and community educational outreach to help achieve our future vision of a society which is genuinely sustainable, climate safer, properly nature protected, more socially supportive and economically fair. For more details on our work, please visit our website at www.hopeaustralia.org.au.